it's kind of a rom-com setup. And I think that's why romance has become such a big part of what I love doing. It's also important to me to make things that people feel good, that you can show up to a theater, sit next to some people, have the lights go down, and maybe you escape the everyday realities of the world just for 91 minutes. And I think in the rom com you can do that. Romance and comedy, these two things come hand in hand to me. There's obviously some levels of drama, but I saw Casablanca at the Arrow Theater about 5 years ago on Valentine's Day, and I never heard an audience laugh, cry, and sort of experience emotion together so much. And I was like, those are the movies I want to make. Movies that are inherently romantic but also have romance in the plot. And that's kind of how we got to the conclusion for 31 Candles. Just make something that made you feel good, hopefully. Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty autobiographical to the extent that, my grandma was named Lila, and I I should say that the movie I made before was a Christmas movie for, as every Jew from New York's dream is to direct a Christmas movie for Amazon Prime. Um, I I had the honor of directing one called Xmas, which you can go watch on Amazon Prime. I'm actually very proud of the movie. But it was an interesting experience. And I think coming back from that filmmaking process, I said to myself, I wanted to make something personal. And what did that mean? And to me, it meant, well, exploring my Jewish heritage, which is something I never really had done in my sort of older, like after being a kid, from I'd say 13 to 31 in that era. I just had never really dived back in, and I thought it was important to, and make a movie about my family and for my family. And I also knew that what I was experiencing was not necessarily just me. There would be people that connected and resonated with the idea of a character doing something later in life that you're supposed to do as a kid. And then I had a really, really profound Zoom with my composer. So you guys hopefully listened to the amazing score in this movie, which is completely original. Everything you heard was live musicians, recording the music. And I work with my composer on every movie I've done so far. We've worked together for 10 years. And he's usually the second phone call I make. First, I call my parents and I say, we're going to make a movie. And then I call him and I say, I'm going to need the music for the movie. And we start talking about the themes even before the script is even completed, honestly. And I'll use that as I'm writing. But him and I were on a Zoom and he was like, what are we going to go do next? And I was like, well, I have two ideas for a movie. I have just enough money to last a year without needing to go get a real job again because I had just made that Amazon film. So we got to do it quick. And he was like, what are the two ideas? And I pitched him two. And he said, well, what's the movie that you have to make right now that you can't make at any other point in your life? And I was like, well, that's the movie about the 31-year-old who has a bar mitzvah, because I'm not going to be 31 forever, unfortunately. And that's how we kind of put the pedal to the metal and said, let's go make 31 Candles.
Living in now.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Die Hard debate, right? Where it's like, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Although 31 Candles is very much a Christmas movie. And it was a film set around the holiday season because I think ultimately the holidays are about family, and it's about running into people that you haven't seen in a while who come home. And I also just love that there's lots of lights. I mean, between Hanukkah and Christmas, light, candlelight is a metaphor, and it's all very cinematic, right? So that it was just an exciting time of year for a movie to take place, in my opinion. Not to mention I had just made a Christmas movie, so I had a lot to say about that process and the product placement and kind of some of the silliness that goes into that, and how can we apply that to a Jewish film? Because, I think for the most part, there's not really many great Hanukkah movies. There are some really good ones, but there's nothing at the level of we don't have our Love Actually yet. I'm just going to go out there and say that maybe that's a movie that me or some of my fellow directors can try to go make about Hanukkah. We need our version of Elf. I don't know, what that's going to look like, but I just wanted to sort of tackle a mix of the two, and it's a movie for everybody. I wanted this to be a movie for everybody. Honestly, it's a movie for anyone who has ever had a crush. That's kind of, to me, it's how far would you go for a crush is always been the thrust of the film. Yeah, absolutely. Well, fun fact, Sarah and I are the same height. We used a lot of VFX to get me to look shorter. I'm actually 6'2". I'm totally, no, this is a joke. I not 6'2". I so a couple of really interesting things with that. I love the casting process. I feel very lucky to have. I believe in all my films. Say what you will about them, but there are no small roles. You know, people that come in for one day can have a memorable scene and a memorable character, and I think that just has to do with casting. Like it just has to do with the sense of who would bring something interesting to the story and the screen. For this movie, we didn't have a casting director. You know, it was myself and my co-producer Jonah Weinstein, two Jonahs. We call him JW on set, and we went after every single person you see. Didn't audition. We went after them and said, "I want you to play this role." So Sarah Coffey, I had seen on Instagram and TikTok. I had asked her to get coffee 2 years prior. I said to her, "I'm writing a movie. I think you're going to be really good for the lead role." And I'm like, I'm sure she hears this all the time, and she never gets a call back. A year later, I call her and I say, "Meet me on 6th and Kent in like Williamsburg, Brooklyn." And I say, "I'm going to bring my camera and we're going to do a chemistry test." And we did a chemistry test just to see what we look like on screen together. And I basically said, "Hey, you're going to run into me. You haven't seen me in 15 years. Last time you saw me, I was taller than you. Let's just run a scene." And we did the scene. I was like, she's amazing. She's got a very old Hollywood quality to her. She's physically very funny. You know, she's romantic, lovable, sharp, but approachable. You know, she just reminded me of a sort of, you know, a Barbara Steinwick type, you know, someone who just felt timeless and classic and of her own. And I was like, she's perfect. And then for the other roles, it was really just people I thought were talented. And because this movie's completely independent, I got to call everyone up and say, "Hey, we're going to make this thing. Are you in or out?" You know, you're not getting paid much, but no actor gets paid much, really, you know, for the most part. So it's more about, hey, I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to make sure you look good, and we'll get it done. Caroline Aaron was a little bit of a convincing session. We had a couple coffees, you know, and she wanted to go in line by line, and rightfully so. It's a really important role. Jackie Sandler stepped in right away. She was amazing. Joey Dardano, who plays the friend. And every role. Jared Freed, wonderful stand-up comic who lives in Delray, Florida, who, you know, so just kind of like has a whole little army of fans down there that came to see the movie. So I just had a blast, and it was the kind of thing where we just said, come join us for the party and come be a part of it. Oh, it's a great question. You've done your research. So there's a joke in the beginning of the movie where the best views of New York come from New Jersey, which I think is true. You know, people underrate the views from New Jersey to New York. Now, let's talk about the building shot. The opening shot of the film is this low angle looking up at these buildings, if you remember, and there's credits, opening title cards. Yeah, the Irving Berlin song, "After you get what you want, you don't want it at all," which of course gives away the movie. You know, it's the lyric. It's exactly his journey, right? He wanted Ava, he got Ava, he got friendship in the end, you know, and but that's supposed to be Leo's character. So Leo's character is supposed to always sort of be looking up in awe, very childlike, right? He's a kid. And literally has to become a man. And so he's looking up at the buildings, and he's looking up at a lot of stuff. The next thing he's looking up at is the dinosaur in the Natural History Museum, which is an exact visual metaphor for Ava. Ava is a extinct conceptual thing that like is no longer like the love they had, that image of them together is no longer. So like I always saw that dinosaur scene as being like, this guy just is like stuck in the past. And he's looking up longingly at the past. And then the progression of the movie, you sort of, obviously with Ava, he's always looking up at her as well. But by the end of the film, he is basically looking almost at the same, because of the parallax, he's almost the same height of the building. And he's looking sort of more longingly, more in control of it. And that's the idea behind that shot, is that here's this massive structure, this like symbol of New York, and there's a level of control and stability that last shot is supposed to have. And sort of the height comparisons. He's no longer like doing that. You know, it's sort of a more even playing field. In terms of the Muppets, tonally the movie draws from a lot of my favorite things. I obviously am a big fan of the Nora Ephron, Nancy Meyers, Woody Allen, Albert Brooks canons. But I of course am curious where they got their ideas from. So you go back further and you get the Billy Wilders and the Ernst Lubitsch and the Howard Hawks and the Frank Capras. And then, there was a movie I saw called Marty, which I referenced in the opening video, which blew my mind. A movie that's just about a guy who has a crush on a girl, and yet it's so profound and deep and emotional. And I was like, wow, you can just make a movie about a guy who has a crush on a girl, and it can work. And the Muppets, and there's sort of with the Muppets, I love how self-referential they are, and yet there's a level of seriousness when you get deep enough in the work of the Muppets. I don't know. I just think the Muppets are fun. They're tonally they have such an interesting thing going on. I love Steve Martin, and a movie he made called L.A. Story. If anyone ever seen L.A. Story, it's a really great comedy. And just living in New York, just ideas that you walk down the street and you say, wouldn't that be interesting? And, what can I do to sort of make my own voice? What can be uniquely Jonah, or, a drawing of other things that makes hopefully you experience something unique.
If you were to make the Hanukkah movie, would you cast Ava or Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of casting not only Sarah, but casting her as the same role she played, so it's a connected universe. I would absolutely cast. I mean, I would love to. For the most part, I work with a lot of the same actors when I can, and the only reason I can't is because they've gotten too busy. So, I would love to cast Ava again in the Hanukkah film. Consider that done.
What is the name of your composer?
Yes, my composer's name is Grant Fonda, and he's really, really talented. He lives in Los Angeles. If you want, you can go onto Apple Music or Spotify, and you can listen to this score. You can listen to it on your way home. In its high quality, version, you can really hear things sort of sing. And we've done, 1, 2, 3, 4 movies together, all of which you can find on Spotify and iTunes. So pretty cool.
Where did you find the children?
Okay, so the kids were the only roles to audition for the movie because I don't know kids. I don't just have kid friends, thank God. And they were through the audition process. And what I'll say is this. They're so good. By the way, round of applause for them, right? I mean, they are like standout characters in the film. What I'll say about them is the second 10 seconds into their tape, they got cast. It didn't take any sort of like, you have to watch it 5 times. Like they were so good right away. And Derek just intimidated me. I was like, he's just scary. He's mean. And so I was like, he needs to be in this movie. Obviously his character, he's the nicest guy in the world, kid in the world. But for the most part, I haven't really, I've been very fortunate to not experience much of it. It's the extent of the scene that you saw with podcasting and, being Jewish, I think, and talking with the bodega lady, like it's been like subtle anti-Semitism, in a sense, but which is just as bad maybe. But I'm lucky to live in New York City where there is such a diverse set of people on a day-to-day basis that I feel like for the most part, at least being on the ground here, everyone is pretty welcoming, and pretty empathetic to each other, perhaps more so than the media will portray. So I've been fortunate, but everything you saw in the movie happened to me at some point. I went on one date, and I mean, classic stuff, right? Someone was like, your nose wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. And I was like, what kind of, are you trying to get me to like you? And then I was just, I'll never, that might have stayed on the cutting room floor, but nothing, no one, for the most part, it's been just sort of too stereotypical. And then I'm like, unfortunately, you just got yourself a line in a movie, and I'm going to make fun of you now. So that's their fault for doing that.
You did such an amazing job as a lead actor in this. Do you have an acting background, and do you have other films and things that you're working on?
Oh, well, I have a background in, first off, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I was, luckily, I wrote the script, and it's fairly autobiographical. That said, some of those scenes are hard to do. It's hard to be yourself. But I had basically been making things since I was 4 years old. Had a camera in my hand, working with my sister and my dogs, and my parents were always very encouraging. I have a background in high school theater. I should be clear. I was cast as the tree in Into the Woods. Not a joke. Nonetheless, it is a background of being on stage. And um, I think with movies it's different because you have a vision, and I can cast very talented people around me to make me look good. The best piece of acting advice I ever received was make your scene partner look great. And so anytime you're focusing on that, making them look really good, in turn, perhaps the two of you look very good. So yeah, and things that I'm working on, I'm always working on new movies. Currently, right now, I have a film coming out April 17th called Busboys with David Spade. Um, and that'll be in theaters. And then I'm building my company, Romantical, which is my rom-com company, which I'm going to basically, we're building the foundation of the company right now. We're, doing our initial fundraise for the company, and then we're going to go make rom-coms for the next foreseeable future. And we're going to bring them to audiences and feel-good films, Jewish films, things that are just building the ecosystem around romance. And so I've been really focusing on structuring that.
Tell us about your boomerang journey to LA and back.
Yes, well, the LA journey is more New York City boomerang in the sense that I went to USC for film school, stayed in LA for 7 years, spent a lot of time in my car thinking about things. Eventually one day realized I got to get back to New York if I want to make movies. And I sold my Honda CRV to the Burbank CarMax for $8,000 more than what the car was worth, and moved back home and made my first movie, Dating in New York, which is actually for free on a site called Tubi right now. So if you guys go home and want to watch my first movie, you'll see clues of what 31 Candles would eventually become, and that's one of our opening pieces of illustration. The movie opens with hand-drawn watercolors, like an old Disney movie. And so I lived in LA for 7 years. I was an assistant. I worked at BuzzFeed. I got fired. I got rehired. I was writing scripts and getting rejected, and then I just had to get back to New York, and I moved back home and haven't left New York since. Now I only go to LA for if they're paying me to be there.
I think the first question was a little bit about the subject of dyslexia in the film and whether or not that's something that has earnestly affected you, how it impacts your filmmaking, or why it was in the story.
So first off, great questions. Well, for this dyslexia component, absolutely. I mean, I am dyslexic. It was immense trouble reading. Anytime it was read out loud, I would count the paragraphs till it got to me and hope it didn't have a hard word in it. Special reading groups, special math groups. The one thing I could do really well was think visually, and that usually quickly became making films and not being afraid to express myself via video. And I've just basically grown up with severe reading disabilities, I would say, and writing disabilities, which is screenwriting is easier because it's like that. It's not like that. And it's also why learning Hebrew is really hard for me, because that's going that way. And this whole thing just confuses me as a dyslexic person. And making a movie was always very natural, and I hadn't seen dyslexia portrayed in a film yet. So I was very excited to do that, at least touch on it, right? So there's a scene where he sees 72 and 27 with the receipt. That's a very rudimentary sort of like, how can I show you what dyslexia is to someone who doesn't maybe know what it is, where you see numbers flipped. But it's also just about like your memory, the way you say people like speech, and it's kind of like the movie and the way some of the scenes are edited. It's all, I edited the film, so there's sort of a component of that extension of the process. And anyway, I was excited to touch on it, and I hope to touch on it on all my movies. And yes, I am actually dyslexic. And then for Romantical, if you guys ever want to keep in touch, I don't know if this is going to be visible. If you have phones, you can do we have a little QR code. So basically, this is my way of staying in touch with people if you're interested. We just built this. So Romantical is going to be bringing movies to different cities. You can sign up here. By the way, guys, if you ever want to email me, my email is in the name of the Zoom. It's just my name, Jonah. Yep. Yeah. But this is great too. This is actually going to allow me to know like let you know when there's a movie in your town. But Romantical is my company, and it's going to be the home of all things romance. And I just thought it was easier to have a brand around romance than it was to be a one-off filmmaker where you have to chase movie to movie. This will allow me to work with other filmmakers, other writers, and maybe you'll leave tonight hopefully remembering who I am, but maybe it'll be easier to remember what Romantical is, which is ultimately a feeling and an emotion. You all being in a room watching a movie, it to me is very romantical. So I appreciate y'all being there. But yeah, that's what Romantical is.
I'm just curious about how you combine the seriousness of speaking out as a Jewish person in contexts like Hanmazik, or doing it in a romantic fashion, and how you're balancing what it is that you can communicate within the Jewish context. And that would be the last question before cheesecake. Go ahead.
Well, enjoy the cheesecake. I would say this. I would say that I look at some of my inspirations as artists, filmmakers who are, Spielberg, Shoah Foundation, right? Spielberg, what he's done for, for Jewish people in Hollywood and cinema, and or of course, any Larry David, right? Whoever it's going to be. I look at the people who I love and who make me laugh, Rob Reiner, and use them as inspirations to make great art and do it proudly as a Jewish person and not hold that back. And it's as simple as that. It's something you got to be really proud of and honored to be a part of Jewish comedy culture and Jewish Hollywood, which is a real gift, to be part of that narrative.
Let's give a big round of applause for Jonah Feingold.